Good morning. Welcome to a new series called Inside the Game. This is the first episode of it, and I'm delighted to say I am joined by Andy McGregor and Tim Keech from MRKT Insights. Good morning, men.
Good morning, Baz.
How are we?
Morning.
Yeah, all is well. We're all Evertonians, so a win was a rare treat at the weekend.
It certainly was. It certainly was. Let's get into it. This is obviously data in football is something that has obviously grown more and more. Certainly recently, I feel like people are getting more on board with it. There's still, obviously, you'll still get naysayers, but I feel as though the general public, I'm talking about, not in terms of being inside football, but I think the general public are coming to terms with more and more of this kind of data being used. I first became aware of it when Brentford started doing it, I think back in 2012, 2013. And I can remember there was quite a sceptical piece of reporting around it, that this fella who had was involved in betting kind of had this algorithm and he wanted to implement it at Brentford, and they're going to use that algorithm to recruit players, and people were kind of laughing at it. But anyone who'd watched Moneyball, I guess, was would have kind of said, well, maybe it can work. So what? I mean, Tim, let's start with you. Data in football. When did you start equating the two could work together?
I think, I think being an Evertonian, it was probably around the time where I saw that Leighton Baines was. I think I read some things about Leighton Baines and how he was assisting all these goals, and we'd always had kind of goals and assists for quite a long time in things like fantasy leagues and things. People have been using those for quite a few years, but then I think I first became aware that I think Baines had this season where he was brilliant to the naked eye. You could watch him every game, but I think he'd only got like 2 or 3 assists. And I was thinking, like, there must be a way to kind of measure that he is still creating these chances, even though the goals aren't being scored. So I started to look, and there are a few websites started to come up at the time that had some stats on performance stats and things that were starting to creep in. And that must have been around 2012, 2013. And then I think probably became radicalized into it by some other people who were producing some really interesting things about the signings Everton were making probably at the time. And they seemed to be really good at predicting who would and who wouldn't work out, just based on what they'd done at previous clubs and the roles they played. And I went from being kind of optimistic about every signing to cynical. And I think I was probably right. Right to be cynical around some of the recruitment, like 5-10 years ago. So it was just finding out that there was this information that was being put out there, and wondering if you could go into it in any more depth. And then there was a guy, Paul Riley, who's really was big on data on the Everton forums a few years ago, and he started producing some really interesting work. So I got to know him. I got to know a few other people in the industry, and we really, I think Andy and I first kind of bonded over around whether Gylfi Sigurdsson was a good signing and things along those lines. So we suddenly, I found a small network of people who were probably a bit geeky in terms of football, and wanted to look at a bit below the kind of surface depth about whether he'd scored goals, to whether it was actually he was the right fit for the club at the time, and so on. So right. I think that's where Andy and I first met, was talking about that type of thing on Twitter, and went from there really.
Andy, I mean, as Tim's saying there was we always talk about now, and I think it's in posts like Pienaar and his pre-assists or Baines, because them two were fabulous at it, weren't they? And people would, like Tim's just said, you'd look after the game and it'd be, don't know, Baines got the assist, and you're like, Pienaar done all the work though, and that kind of thing. And obviously, like Tim just said, me and you bonded on Twitter, didn't we, over certain things? But when did you kind of start getting into that data side of it, and then obviously take it from there?
Much later, really. I think than the most. I think I up until I'd say about 2017, I guess I was probably a regular. Well, early 2017, I was a regular football fan, really, in terms of the way I viewed football, the way I looked at it. And then I've always been interested in data and statistics. I like baseball, I like basketball, I like a lot of American sports. I've always been interested in them. And I started reading, similar to yourselves, about Brentford and about other clubs. And obviously Liverpool had started to use it under Comolli. And then I've obviously continued under Michael Edwards and the Red Sox influence on that. And really, I just started looking into it, really, in the sense of what did my perception of things were, and what the data was. And sometimes my perception was correct. For example, I always thought that Ross Barkley was an extremely creative player in open play, and the data bore out that Ross Barkley was. And I always valued Ross Barkley's contribution to Everton, probably as well as due to data, but also because I liked him as a player as well. But then, like as you say, I think interestingly about Leighton Baines, I think if it was nowadays with the way Twitter's used to highlight players, obviously there's a lot of use of the data and visualization. I think Leighton Baines would be viewed in a completely different way than he is. I think a lot of people appreciate Leighton Baines when he was playing, but I think now people will be talking about him. I think of those seasons just before the end of the Moyes era and the first Martinez sort of seasons. He was incredible, like really unbelievable for a left back. Like in terms of European, in terms of creating chances, he was up there with the best players in Europe. So I think, unfortunately for Leighton, maybe this this revolution in time, well, good for Everton because he probably would have been sold.
I was going to say they've been sold a bit of it now, yeah.
Yeah, it's a different time because that awareness of how good he was. I think everyone knew he was good, but obviously, I think that extra layer of contextualization would be it added on top would show how good he was. So no, it would have been about 2017 for me in terms of looking at data, and then I started blogging, speaking to people like Tim, and yes, I remember a piece by Luke O'Farrell. I always come back to this piece about Gylfi Sigurdsson again, replacing Ross Barkley. He used data at the time to show why I wasn't a good fit, and sort of come in line with my thinking as well. So overall, that's where I started in terms of data.
Yeah, my eyes told me that Gylfi Sigurdsson wasn't the right replacement for Ross Barkley. And then I seen stats kind of... But some of the stats, I remember, just before we go on, I just remember Sky Sports using the thing and saying, he scored the most goals outside of the top four, whatever. He's created this many assists, this many chances. And you start going, maybe I've not seen it. It didn't take me long to realise I was right. As good a contribution as he did make at times, because he did score a lot of goals from certainly nowadays for us from midfield. But he just, to me, we were losing something totally different than what Gylfi Sigurdsson was going to give us. We were losing someone who'd get the ball and travel up the pitch with it and drive at people, and that. As good as Gylfi was at other things, he wasn't that kind of player, was he? But anyway, that's enough Everton. Tim, so when did Market Insights begin then, Tim? Obviously, you've just talked about the introduction to data. What piqued your interest? Having conversations with people like Andy and other people. And Luke O'Farrell is a name that I'd forgotten, but I remember reading a lot of his stuff as well back in the day. So how did Market Insights come about for you? Did you see a gap, or was it really that nerdy side of you, like you just said, which really took over?
Yeah, I see. I was working just normal jobs. I had a consultancy, like business analysis consultancy, and I was working on contract jobs. And I had a 2 or 3 month gap where one contract finished and the other one hadn't started. So kids had just gone to school both full time. So I was in the house on my own all day, and I was just like, I'll just write about football. I'd always enjoyed it, and I thought, actually, I've now got time to sit down and fill the hours doing that. So I started writing about it, and very quickly I got kind of picked up by people at clubs who had messaged me and asked questions. And after a while, I thought, well, if people from clubs are reaching out and asking my opinion on things, I might as well get together with a few other people I'd met. So there's a guy, Ram, who's a data guy, who's an absolute genius. And he had built these systems that kind of took data and turned them into really nice visualizations. And then Matt and Kevin, who also were producing really good work at the time. So the four of us initially got together and said, well, we've got a month left of me being off work. And they were kind of like much younger than me, early in their careers. And yeah, just finishing university and stuff. So I was like, why don't we just put everything we think together into one document and send it to a club and see if we get any interest. So we literally, it was as simple as like Swansea City had mentioned that they wanted to modernise their recruitment department after they got relegated. and Graham Potter had just left, and they were appointing a new manager, and they were restructuring the entire kind of back end of the club. So we're like, okay, Swansea, that'll do. So we effectively put together like a 50 or 60 page document saying what we'd do if we worked for them, and sent it off. Didn't hear anything, didn't expect to really. Was almost about to start the new work when we got a message, an email through from the new head of recruitment, Andy Scott, who is at Forest now. And he sent us a message just saying, really read your document, really liked it, let's meet up. So me and Matt travelled down to a service station off the M25 and sat with him for a couple of hours. And in that evening, he phoned and said, yes, let's give it a go. So the four of us started, and then within a couple of weeks, they said all the scouts had left since the change of manager, and people tend to do that in football. You follow around the people you work with.
Yeah.
So they had nothing in place. So I said, I know two guys, Andy and Jay, who I said were really good. They were the best kind of people on Twitter at the time at knowing players and at rating players. So I said, let's get them involved. So they agreed, and they paid us to bring Andy and Jay into MRKT Insights. So yeah, we've since then 3 years full-time work for 5 people now, and about another 5 consultants working with us. So yeah, it's been a kind of an unexpected, unplanned journey into working full-time in football, but yeah, it's gone really well so far.
That's fantastic, and I love stories like that anyway. I do. Andy will tell you that I do. I love people who can see something and they enjoy it and they go after it and they make a go of it. It's to me that's perfect, isn't it? It's something you enjoy. You can, there is that thing. Although sometimes, being an Evertonian and doing what I do question it. But if you love your job, you don't work a day in your life and all that thing. But there will be. I'm quite sure you've had a lot of stressful days doing it as well, but on the whole, it's a game we all love, isn't it? And to be involved in it is fantastic. Andy, I can remember having discussions with you on Twitter over some players, and it was as simple as come in the studio, then let's do a show together, and we've had our friendship since then, and we've had many a chat over players face to face and on Twitter and at 1 o'clock in the morning. But for you, for you getting involved in that, obviously, like Tim has said, you were doing a lot of really detailed player reports and stuff, things like that. So when that opportunity come about with Tim, were you just a case of jump at it because this is what I really want to get into?
Well, Tim's going to like this. So at the time, I was doing work for an agency, and I'm still friends with the agents I was working with then. He's been a big help to me since I started. I was doing a lot of reports on Twitter about a lot of different European players, and at the time I wasn't. I didn't want to do the job I was doing anymore. I've been working in financial consulting for 10 years, and I wasn't enjoying it anymore. So I left, and I was sort of looking around at what to do, looking what to do sort of next. Yeah. Started and I also felt that in my personal life that I wasn't able to have the conversations I wanted to have about football with my friends. My friends were interested in football on a level the same as me. Not that everyone is. People have got different levels of interest in football, of course. But mine was a deep analytical thinking level of football. So I wanted to sort of branch out. So that's why I started the El Pavotti football blog. And people started to notice. So I did, different scouting reports, highlighted players in South America. By watching tournaments, I invested in myself by buying a White Scout account and using the 500 minutes I had from there a month to try and find players, which is not easy. And I even used like Tim said, those websites that have been around, such as Who Scored and Understat, to try and find those next players. And I think I did quite well at the time. And then I joined the agency. I spent a summer learning about mandates, which is whereby clubs or players from abroad give agencies in the UK the mandate to sell them to clubs here. So we were looking for players that we could sort of sell to Premier League clubs. And then Tim come along, It was to tell me that he got an offer from Swansea City, and obviously me and Tim had a friendly rivalry, of course, because that's the way we worked about French league players. And I was very, very jealous of Tim getting the Swansea thing. So I was agreeing with envy, and then he come to me a couple of weeks later and said, we'd like to take you on. I was obviously over the moon because I already knew him, Ram, and Matt, and I didn't really know Kevin and Jay that well, but I certainly spoke to them on Twitter. So no, it all came together really well, and as you say, it's been a wonderful ride so far, and I can't ever South thankful I am to them all for taking me on.
Yeah, I mean, it's that is what a story. That is brilliant, isn't it? Brilliant that something you love, something you want to do. That both of you at the right time and kind of in your career. That listen, and that's sometimes how it is, isn't it? Call it serendipitous, call it fate, call it the stars aligning, however you want to dress it up. Call it luck. However, right place, right time. Once that happens, it's almost perfect for you to fall into it and then to make it grow, and that's exactly what you're doing. And obviously, I speak to Andy quite a lot, so I know that it's going really well. Yeah, well, I apologise for that, mate, but you've been the same. It's not all one way. Don't start all that. Yours is 9 o'clock in the morning when I'm doing 15 things.
Yeah.
Can you, Tim? So we're obviously that's Swansea came up. You got involved with that. So how did that work? How was that with your first club and trying to impress them? And what what did you have to do? Like what's the first thing you do when that happens? It's great then saying, oh, we like your presentation. Everything's great before you do it, isn't it? It's that thing of like preparation is perfect. You buy into it. Look what I'm gonna do for you. Now I've got to deliver.
Yeah.
It's like the signing. Every new signing's exciting, isn't it? They've got the shirt and you're like, Neil Magpie will get 30 goals for Everton. But how do you, what do you do when the contract's signed and we've got to go to work? So what can you talk us through what that was like?
Yeah, so the club at the time was in a situation where they had been relegated from the Premier League. They still had a hangover of quite a few high-value contracts from that time. So it wasn't a club you were going to go into and they've got millions of pounds to spend. It was one where we were having to look at the structure of the club. So they had hired Steve Cooper then as the head coach, who'd only previously worked with England youth teams and in Liverpool's reserve and youth teams. Yeah. So we looked at it that with Andy, this wasn't just us, of course, it was the whole club, but Andy would say, like, what can we do to make this? What can we do to maximise the quality of players we have on the pitch? So we quickly kind of felt that using Steve's ability to work with young players was going to be the right way to go, and using his contacts within the FA and within the kind of youth systems of the big clubs. So they brought in Mark Guay, Ryan Brewster, Conor Gallagher, and players like that who'd worked with the England youth teams, who all did really well and kind of filled that gap where they were getting rid of the expensive contracts and bringing in the the wage bill down to a sustainable level. What we did in the background as well is try and build up a scouting database so that when there was money to spend or they in the future had the ability to spend money, we'd at least be on top of all the players with reports logged in their scouting system. So they, like most clubs, have a paid for scouting system, which we would file reports in for them. And we literally probably got hundreds of reports over the 9 or 10 months that we were there on the contract with Swansea to do. So we built up a huge scouting database with them. And the way that works is generally you're watching video and you're filling in almost like each player's attributes, and you give them a rating on a system, and then that gives you a total point score for the player. And I think that's probably industry standard to do things along those lines. Sometimes it's letter grade, sometimes it's numbers, but at the end of the day, you're watching players, you're looking at the attributes, trying to find the ones who best fit the club. And I'd say with Swansea, I think we were probably we were very enthusiastic, and we were probably a bit naive at the time about the reality of where clubs would shop for players. The majority of transfers are domestic in the UK. The vast majority are domestic. So it's great that on Twitter we were saying, oh, this 18-year-old in Slovenia is brilliant. But the reality is most clubs won't touch him. You're far better looking at the 26-year-old playing in the Championship who's consistent and is already at that level and is proven. So I think, we went into it with a bit of naivety, but a lot of enthusiasm. And I think the work was definitely appreciated. And from there, other clubs, because Swansea were kind enough to let us publicise the fact they're taking us on, other clubs picked it up. And we ended up with some quite a wide client base, not just in the UK, but like around the world. The process is always fairly similar, regardless of the level. It's like use data to find the interesting players, watch them, find the best match for the club you're working for, and really like go into that granular detail, like Andy was talking about, the levels of it. You can't just say he's a good striker. Like, what's he do specifically, and how's that fit in with like how you create chances and all that level of information that probably fans to a certain extent don't care about. You just want the goal to be scored. But if you're spending millions of pounds on a player's contract, it's got to be the best match of the available players. So we had a chance for Andy to go into the geeky, super detailed, granular stuff. So that's basically why I'd say most clubs operate like. And certainly, I think there's ways you can make it run efficiently and effectively, but at the end of the day, it's always a combination of data and video and a bit of live scouting at the end of the process.
But I mean, Andy will tell you that me with me strikers, I look at everything with strikers. The other, not so much the others. He'll have me off for midfielders, defenders, and all that. But he's not pulling. He's not pulled the wool over my eyes with forwards, because that was the position I played. I love it, and I look at everything. And you're absolutely right. Just because someone clock some goals, it's what else they can do, and I guess that's where data comes in. Andy, obviously Tim's just said there, that was Swansea, that was the first, you first broke your duck with Swansea, and it's grown since then. Because you've done good work. Things like that don't grow unless you're doing good work. So how is it been for you in terms of managing? Like, how would you go from, say, a Swansea level side to, say, a League Two side? Are their needs different? I'm quite sure budget-wise they're different, and maybe level of play. So how do you factor that in when you're looking for players?
Well, So we do have a range of different clients across the different levels. Like we saw when we worked with Swansea at the time. It was a good championship side. They made the playoffs under Steve Cooper. They were certainly a good side. And we've done work with with League Two sides in different capacities. Obviously, we're probably most known in UK circles for our work in League One in terms of our work with Plymouth, Argyle and MK Dons, and I guess with maybe some other big clubs that I won't mention because obviously client confidentiality, our role's different between the two. So with some of our bigger clients, we're probably on the on the outside of the process, contributing in terms of names and different projects that we can help the club with people like a Plymouth or an MK Dons. We're involved in the process all round in every way. I speak to the head of recruitment, Jimmy Dickinson, at Plymouth every single day about different players. We do projects for them every single day. I speak to Neil Dewsnip, who's the technical director. So it's every different project that we undertake has different elements. Obviously, at the core of it, certainly with my work with clubs, it is generally recruitment. That is my speciality in terms of helping players. And you're right there, it is different, horses for courses, as I always say. You have, different players for different levels. And that's I when I first started on Twitter, I was fairly European and South America and Japan, or wherever I could find players, because that's where I find it exciting. And I had to sort of adapt to the EFL. And the level between League One, League Two, Championship, even though they're only separated by one league difference, is vastly different. So that involved a lot of watching for me in terms of what was required in those leagues, understanding the levels, understanding the level of physicality, how quick the game is, the level, the level of players that you need to find. So that's not just data, because again, data can help you to identify good players at EFL level, but there's a lot of contextualization about watching players, the physical attributes that you need for teams. So with the teams that we work with, at the EFL level, it's a lot of it is watching as well as using data, and they marry it together. As Tim said, the process for me is always use data to identify You've then had that context around level, physical attributes, technical ability within that you're watching, and then obviously, as Tim said again, the evidence, and on the end, you have to evidence why that player fits that club, and we've had some good success with those League One clubs. So yeah, it's gone well in terms of that. I think, as I always say to people about football, watch football at every different level you can, because obviously I grew up watching Everton in the Premier League. That's the highest level of football you can get. It's vastly different at League One. You can't expect players to do the same things. It can be quite frustrating, but that is how you improve. You understand different levels, and obviously, again, when you understand the levels, it makes it easier for you to make judgments on players, because you can say, well, that player is not League One is a League One player, but he has a ceiling of a League One. Or you can look at a player and say, he's a League One player now. Maybe in 18 months, you can see him as a Championship player with certain improvements. And at Plymouth Argyle, especially, who I work with closely, are a club who wants to bring players in and improve them. So that is part of our remit in looking at players who we can improve and kick on.
It's mad, isn't it? Because you see some people will look at players in the Championship and they might be scoring goals, and they go, buy him. He's got loads of goals. He'd be fine for Everton or whatever, or other clubs. And as you go down the leagues, you're saying there'll be lads in League Two who are putting the ball in the net maybe regularly, or a centre back who looks like he's comfortable. But then when you look and can he actually step up? And in some cases, people can improve. You can never stop improving. You can work, but it is difficult to guess with levels as well, with ceilings, like you're saying, isn't it? I think the ceiling will be quite obvious. You can tell that although they're effective at that level, would they be effective higher up? We see this. I always call it the Dwight Gale scale. Is old Timu Pukki. We know he's an international footballer, but he's very, very good at Championship level, Premier League.
Hey, again, this is where it comes in. Timu Pukki is a good Premier League striker when he plays. I think just under 1 and 2.
No,
honestly, this is what I'm saying. This is the difference.
Not for me. Not for me. He's had 2 cracks. He's had 2 cracks at it, and he's not done it either time. No, sorry. And Dwight Gale's the same. But what you're talking about is different. No, but what you're talking about is someone who can play in the Premier League. Well, I can name you Umar Niasse, who played in the Premier League, but I wouldn't say.
No, but I agree with that. But what we point out, I don't want to get to this, but what we point
I told you, midfielders had to back away immediately there.
No, but this is a good point really in terms of the Dwight Gale scale. Yeah, you go from Timu Pukki. Well, you use other examples where they've gone from as a top Championship side, they've been promoted into the Premier League, and then they're not one of the big fish anymore, and the chances come less and less.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's why I do back Pukki, because he has taken chances when he's got them, even though at Norwich obviously found it difficult when they played in the Premier League. But I think that's another thing. If you look at other players who come up, Neil Maupay scored 25 for Brentford, 8 or 10 goals striker for Brighton. Obviously, he's come to Everton. Hopefully, can kick on. It's just that there's a change, obviously, in the fact that you're going from clubs that create multiples of chances to clubs that are struggling to make chances, because there's so many dominant big teams in the Premier League. Obviously, we've talked about leagues within leagues. You play 12 games a season, which is a third of your games, against monster teams with uber budgets bigger than yours. So it's about the ability to identify those players who can take chances in the limited, take score goals and the limited number of opportunities that they get. But no, I certainly understand the Dwight Gale scale. Obviously, people have seen him score multiple goals at Championship level, and obviously not been able to do it for Newcastle Premier League level.
Yeah, and as obviously you're right. Of course, you're right in terms of they're playing against better centre backs as well, who are quicker and stronger. So that's going to cut your chances down if your team isn't creating a lot of chances. I'm just looking at the other bits around, like say Pukki. He's not got a real turn of pace. Is he physically strong enough to keep the ball? He's okay. He's not too bad that way. But I'll equate that to if Everton were going after him. But then for every team who Pukki, there's obviously Ivan Toney, who's now in the England squad. He's a player who was played in League One, didn't he? Where was he at in League? Was he Peterborough, wasn't he? And then obviously Brentford. He's been fantastic at Brentford, and he stepped up. And they're a strong side anyway now, just from their recruitment, that brings us nicely back to recruitment. And they've done it, a lot of people would say, or more people now would say, yeah, that's the way you should be doing it. And I know, Andy, listen, you've banged on about this for years. We've had many a video out there of us going, and I'm sure Tim I've seen Tim's tweets when he's trying to throw things in about a certain club.
Passive
He does it,
aggressive.
he does. But it must be
told off by Andy every time I tweet.
I know, but it must be so frustrating because you're obviously within the game and can see how it works. But let's just for now, let's stay away from that. We can have a conversation off camera about our club and things like that. How does a transfer market work for you then, Tim? Because obviously transfer windows is what fans now have been led to believe is better than football. If you actually look at the excitement level while the transfer window's open, once the footy starts again, the levels kind of drop a little bit and it'll be ramped up again. But how does a transfer window work for you? So obviously we've just had one closed. Are you already thinking about January, or how does it work?
Yeah, I'd say the players that clubs sign, it would be very unusual, or it should be very unusual for them to be signing players that haven't been on the radar for them for quite a long time. So if you're talking about us with our League One clients, I imagine every single player that we end up putting forward to be signed has been extensively looked at for months before that, unless they are a suddenly emerging talent you've got a chance of getting. And then you can blitz that player and find out everything you can in a short amount of time. And that's where people like Brighton have probably had not luck, but they've done well because they've looked at those players and they've been really good at forecasting who's only just emerging, got them in early, and then given them like a year to develop, like Casado and Jakob Morder and people. They've done that process really well. But with us, we'd also always have looked at the players well before the window. It might be 2 or 3 windows before you actually end up signing that player after they've gone in the database, just because I think what people probably don't understand, or really maybe they would understand it, but they don't really think about it, is that you're not acting in isolation. It's not like you want a player and you can get them. It's like you want a player, 5 other clubs want them. You've got a list of probably like 10 players that you would consider for that position, and you work your way through the priority list. Other people are coming in. Other people are bidding for your players. Someone breaks up with their girlfriend and wants to move area. All these type of things that you don't really think about happen all the time. They're human beings you're dealing with at the end of the day, and they can say yes or no to transfers. And I know with some of our League One players we've signed, there's been 6, 7, 8, 9 clubs in for the same player. And then it's a question of how can you best persuade them that you've done the most work on them, and your system and your manager and your club is right for that player. So there's a lot of like a seduction of players, I think you'd call it, where you're trying to get them to join you over the many other options they will have. And a lot of the time at League One level, that comes down to geography. And they'll be like, I love what you've said, but I live in Manchester and I'm not going to move to Plymouth, or I'm not going to move to Milton Keynes. So, and the wages aren't that high that it's worth it for most players at that level. You're talking a few £1,000s a week, not tens of thousands of pounds a week. So it's not bad money by any means, but it's not like uproot your family, buy a new house off your first couple of weeks' wages type money. So, so we would always say you go into it really prepared. You've got long lists of options for every position, and then it's a case of your director of football being able to persuade those players to join you, and the manager at that stage would get really involved in speaking to the players and persuading them that their club is the best fit. So there's probably a lot more kind of talking about transfers before they happen. And I'm pleased to say, like, at all the clubs we're at, it's very rare it leaks who we're speaking to or anything. If it does, it's normally the agent trying to drum up interest in their player. But within clubs, nothing really leaks out to the press. So quite a lot of the time you'll hear fans saying, well, I know we're talking to this guy, and it's like, it's either complete rubbish or it was something that was mentioned maybe 6 weeks earlier and the agent is now trying to drum up interest because it's fallen through. But live transfers very rarely do people hear anything about. I mean, that might be different at different levels, but certainly for our clubs, it's been really, really tight in terms of public information. So I've definitely got off transfer speculation because even if they had our lists and they had like 100 players on our lists, we're going to sign 2 of those. So they gave you 100 names, 98 would be wrong, even if they had our actual list of players we were going to sign or we wanted to sign. So yeah, it's still a bit of fun. I still enjoy it. I still get annoyed by the players you get linked with and, that type of thing. But I know it's nonsense, so I'm not as bothered as I used to.
And Andy, for you, so I suppose obviously will already be looking ahead to January for possible recruitment and stuff. And is that, like Tim's just said, is this gonna involve players you've been looking at for months rather than someone just popping up and an opportunity?
Yeah, there's different layers to it. There's new players who pop up all the time. Players who come out of academies, people who are signed in from different places like Ireland or Scotland or wherever. They probably have, you'd have knowledge of, but you don't have that contextualization, that knowledge of them playing in the EFL. I suppose sometimes that when players come over from Ireland is a league that is not the same level as a league here. So sometimes seeing them do well in the league, obviously that can add costs to it, because obviously if they do well in the EFL, the value's more than when they do well in Ireland. But there's different levels of players. So yes, there's often is that we have been looking at players for a while, whether they were at Premier League under 21 level, they've got a low move to League Two, they've done well there, they've shown us they can play men's football, then it's time to come to a League One club. Things of that nature. Yeah, so there's usually players who were 21st on the list. That's quite a lot of players, but 21st on the list last season. Depending on how they started the season, what the current situation is for them, they may have moved up the list. So it can happen. Obviously, players develop at different ages. We talk about positional. Sometimes strikers take a little bit longer because obviously the physical side of the game is quite tough. Or defenders who tend to develop a bit later as well, because obviously they have to experience all the different types of environment they're going to play in, and obviously play against much more physical men as well as they come out of the youth levels. So there's different factors in how we end up coming to find players and recruit players. But certainly, as Tim said, you do it's very rare nowadays, because of the access that people have, that you wouldn't know a player at all. If you think back to 15 years ago, obviously Udinese were very famous and having thousands of DVDs from all around the world to look at players. I would probably struggle in those times. That would require going to matches and being in the right place at the right time often, to find Alexis Sanchez or whoever people like Udinese sign. So it'd be very difficult to find those players without the mass amount of information, whether it be data or video that we have now. So for January now, we build up by watching players, in the current teams they're in. We obviously have reports on them from the past. We have we carry 5 years of previous data as well to look at players' development curves. So it's just about looking at the needs of the team. We use data obviously to identify what the team's missing, whether that be, for example, someone who can clear, do well for defending set pieces. Obviously set pieces become much more concentrated on area football, and teams who can't defend set pieces tend not to do as well in leagues as Everton and Leicester obviously saw last season with the issues with set pieces. So it's just about identifying the weaknesses or the needs of a team, and then finding players who now fit that need, and that can change. The previous season, the player might have not been suited at all, but now because of the different roles or the involving tactics of the manager, whether the manager changes, you need a different type of player.
Is it frustrating when you've identified the player and you're leaving it, like Tim just said, you're leaving it in the hands of the sporting director at the club, and you're thinking, we've got him, he's going to be perfect for what we've picked up, and then an agent does the dirty, or an agent says, you can get you another 200 quid at this club, and that goes.
Yeah.
It is frustrating, yeah, it is, and I'm as Tim will say, I'm quite a
really
freak.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah. No. My issue, I haven't. I wanted obviously because it's handing it off to other people to do it. And don't get me wrong, people at Plymouth, Preston, and other people, great at what they do. So I trust them completely. But it's just that's the nervous part, because you've done all the work that you want to do. But then again, for us as well, it's a real test of us as well, because often you don't get your first choice. I'll be honest. There's plenty of times where we've got. And even we've ended up with a third choice, but because of the work we've done, we feel confident that third choice will still improve us. So it's about the quality of your list, really. I think obviously it's famous that Liverpool wanted to sign Marco Reus or Julian Brandt, and the data on the recruitment department convinced Jurgen Klopp that actually Mo Salah was the right choice, and history tells us that was the right choice. So it's
damn
about
you,
quality.
Marco Royce. Go on.
Yeah, damn you, Marco Royce. Yeah, exactly. So it's about the depth and quality of your scout and finding those players who fit. Obviously, sometimes it can be one or two players, and that is the most frustrating part, that you do sometimes have to look around for something maybe not as good as you had, because the obviously in the EFL there's not many clubs who have money or vast wage bills. So trying to find players who fit within your budget, who will also come to the club, it can be very difficult. There's a lot of variables involved as well.
Tim, does it? I know more and more are using it, but does it surprise you that some Premier League clubs haven't seemed in the past to have kind of used what is, to me, is a sensible metric to see whether players fit? I mean, we can talk about our own club, which seems now to be doing things in the right way. Manchester United is one for me where I look at and I just think, with all them resources, how do you still keep getting things wrong? They should be better. And there's loads of, it seems like there's quite a few other clubs who just don't work at the same level. So does that surprise you, given obviously you're interested in data, you're interested in statistics and stuff, and how you're applying it at lower level? Does it surprise you that, you've mentioned Brighton, I've mentioned Brentford as well, who seem to be two clubs with lower budgets who are doing it? Does it surprise you that others haven't, when I think Liverpool certainly do it and have done well with it? I imagine Manchester City do similar, maybe. So does it surprise you?
Yes and no. Yes, I think probably every club will have a really good data department in it at Premier League level. They'll have staff, they'll have all the access to the systems, they'll have built their own data systems. But it all comes down to the ownership and the leadership in the club. If your owner is going to get excited because they've seen a player score a goal in the Champions League on telly and says, I want him, then that's going to overrule every bit of data analysis or any list that has been put together, because at the end of the day, it's they're the ones signing the check. They're the ones deciding which players are signed. And likewise, if you get a manager who, and probably to reach a certain level, you need a certain personality, and that personality is very sure in what they're doing, and they will think they know players better than anyone else that fit their system. And even though you might go in there armed with your reams of statistics and video clips and scouting reports, if they've watched that player have an absolutely brilliant game, and they've heard great things from their friends in the industry, that will all be information that is used as a bounce to decision. And then it comes down to how strong your processes are in your club. And that's something that we push to a load of clubs now, in addition to the scouting work, is the kind of the processes that you need behind that to get the value from it. Because, as I said, I know that lots of the clubs you mentioned have really good people at them who produce really good work, but haven't necessarily had that unified direction of what do we want this football club to be playing like. And that we use the word alignment far too much, but it's basically, does your owner and your sporting director and your coach and your players all make sense in the way that you want to play football? Because if the manager doesn't agree with the other three people, then it won't work, and the manager can be sacked and replaced. If the sporting director doesn't disagree, doesn't have the same vision as the owners, he'll be sacked. But if the owner themselves doesn't know what they want, then that's probably a really dangerous situation, because they'll just react passionately to things rather than looking at the underlying performance. We lost 4-0 in the derby, get rid of the head coach. Well, the opposition might have a team that's cost 5 times as much to assemble and is a world-class team that's been built up over years. And you might be 6 months into a 5-year rebuild. And that's the thing that I think we've noticed most of all. It doesn't happen overnight, like especially at Premier League level. You give a player a bad contract over 5 years, as soon that player will be with you for the full 5 years. You won't be able to get rid of them. That if you're not willing to pay, they're not giving you 120 grand a week's worth of value. There's no other league in the world who will take them on for 120 grand a week.
No,
they will just loan them out until the contract goes. And we've seen that a lot at some clubs over the last few years. And I'm sure Turkish Airlines have made a lot of money shipping players to and from Merseyside over the last few years as well. But it's generally the case that, your owner determines how good your club will be. So Brentford and Brighton, very stats driven. Both the owners are professional gamblers. Basically, they run bookies, or they've made their money through fine margins and looking for kind of little arbitrage opportunities. And I think sometimes your owners who have made money in other ways see it as like a trophy asset where I want to buy the best player I can get and I will keep putting money in until we're good. And that used to work. You used to be able to be a Jack Walker and go in and win the championship with Blackburn by just buying the best players. But now the gap between an income of a mid-table team and a top Champions League team is 200 million a year. No one can afford to bridge that gap by even the spree that some clubs in Everton, for example, have been on over the last 10 years. You always see Liverpool fans saying like, "Oh, you've spent more than us." If you ignore wages, yes. If you take wages into account, there's still £500 million gap between the spending of the two clubs.
Wow.
You're not going to bridge that on your own. So you have to be clever and you have to build things up slowly. And all those kind of, we want the 27-year-old so we win now type conversations. You're better off buying the 21-year-old and having them for 5 years, Richarlison style, and selling them for 60 million quid and reinvesting that money again in your next generation of younger players, rather than just constantly buying your ready-made players at vast expense who don't really last that long, as we've seen with quite a few players over the years.
You know what? This is something that I'll hold my hands up and say when it's just from my club, obviously from our club, when Everton were taken over and we bought a series of players who were kind of mid-20s, well old, coming into what do you describe it as peak? Not quite post-peak, but in peak. At the time, you're thinking, I understand this, thinking we're going to jump up. But I think that, so at first, I remember there was criticism when Everton, just using Everton as an example, when Everton brought in, not so much Garner, because he's still unbelievable now, but, when he was excellent, then 7 million quid, there's what, and he was, but other players, Yannick Bolasie and Ashley Williams and these kind of players who were all that age and even a year later, you are thinking, I think people were still thinking of, we can get a quick run on it. But my thinking's totally, and probably influenced heavily by Andy as well, to be fair, is that you do have to look at it slightly differently. I think a lot of us, I might be wrong, but I'll use me. I can't speak for people, can I? So I'll use me. I think you still... We're looking at the Chelsea/Manchester City era where heavy investments, got it wrong, heavily investments, that's a bit better, heavily invested, now we're all right, we've bridged it. Manchester City were obviously the last one before they pull the ladder up with, profit and sustainability and FFP, call it what you want. They were able, don't forget, a lot of people forget with Manchester City that we're on the second takeover. The first takeover splits the hell of a lot of money and got hardly anyone out of it of any worth. Other than Alano, and Bozyanov and those.
Vincent Kompany was the one.
I was going to say Vincent Kompany was the one who was unbelievable. The second one brought in unbelievable footballers like Aguero, David Silva, and took it to a next level. But City were able to jump up 8 stairs, weren't they, by just going bang, 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 bang. Everton done it totally the other way, and because the rules had changed. And it's why I look at Newcastle now when I hear people. I had quite a good discussion with Paul Scholes on the overlap about how Newcastle weren't just going to be able to keep going. He was saying they'll just keep spending 300 million a year, 400. And it's like, they can't really because of the rules. So you'd have to do it differently. And Newcastle, I think they are trying to do it a little bit differently, and other clubs do, but it has changed so much. Just one thing.
Sorry, can I just make a quick
go on,
comment?
Go on.
No, I think this is where it's become really important now. I think, as you say, people looked at the Man City, the Chelsea way, and I think now you have to sort of pre-plan completely. If you're a new owner, new investment group, whatever it may be, you have to pre-plan and strategize how you're going to spend that money, because we've seen Aston Villa, spent money. They're probably coming up against FFP. Obviously, luckily, they're Jack Grealish to sell, but then you get down the line, you're going to still need a Jalen Ramsey or whoever to sell. So, and that's an issue for clubs trying to maintain that as you're going up. You're going to have to lose players to keep spending. And it's high, and don't get me wrong, people can make good recruitment decisions year after year, but you don't. Sometimes you have fallow periods. Every club has. Liverpool might have one coming up. Some say God willing, but but that's what happens. So the strategic planning of how to spend the money is massive. Now, obviously, Newcastle, we'll use Newcastle as a quick example. I won't go too long on this. They obviously had a real time situation, the fact that they could have got relegated. So they had to probably front load a bit of that money on maybe some older players, Chris Wood, Kieran Trippier, and others. So that's circumstance. But I think if there are any new owners coming to the Premier League, strategizing how you're going to get around the FFP situation and to become we'll call them a Leicester, because obviously Leicester, even though we know now they're up against FFP themselves, Leicester to compete in a Leicester or West Ham style way where you're getting your seventh, you're getting into Europe, or maybe like a Leicester. I know they won the league, but that was a sort of different period for them, winning the FA Cup under Brendan Rodgers. That's probably the new way of competing. Unfortunately, there is probably a way, and there will be some luck one day where teams do become a Tottenham and break into that big number of teams. But that initial strategization, having the right people in the right departments and the right resources in place, is massive for clubs now. Unfortunately, you do have owners coming into the league now, but who want to show that they knowledge or spend the money. And I think caution's required, because I think if you want to be a top Premier League club or a top 7 or top 8 club, you need to think about it heavily before you start spending.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and it can be done, but it's planning, and you've got to try and bridge that gap, because like what you've both said, Tim said as well, the budgets between the two playing wise, how do you bridge that gap when they've got Champions League and 100 million quid to spend extra and all of that? So there has got to be other ways. Just Tim, I want to just come back to something you did say there about when you're talking about management as well. Is that something that you've looked at? I think I've seen you put out a few times like a club structure, and talking about management. So can your analytics, what you do at MRKT Insights, can that help with the recruitment of managers as well, would you say?
Yeah, so we've done a few projects. One with a really, really big club, some abroad in Serie A in Italy. We've helped recruit, and also within the EFL a couple of times now as well. And yeah, so we always say, like, again, look at the raw statistics of a manager, win percentage, all that type of thing. Yes, you could do that, but what's the context, and what's the coaching style, what's the personality style, and that alignment I mentioned earlier, who's going to work well with the owner, who's going to work well with the squad they've got. So yeah, you can look at how coaches have set their teams up in the past. You can watch the games that they've coached. But I think everyone would probably agree that if you took Pep Guardiola and put him in charge of Oldham Athletic, it's not going to instantly transform them overnight. It's going to take several years of he would do a really good job, I'm sure, and he would inspire the players, he would set them up, but they wouldn't be beating Manchester City just because the playing staff is completely different. So a bit like the Dwight Gallagher thing you had earlier, where you're coaching in the Championship and you get promoted to the Premier League, and say you've been a really ball dominant team in the Championship, you've had 70% possession, you've 10 chances a game, you come into the Premier League, you're not going to have that. So if you compare the Championship season to the Premier League season, it's going to be like you're looking at two completely different teams. So what we always say to clubs is you've got to consider the whole circumstances, the personality, the types of coaching the guy does, and it's certainly in terms of when you're looking at a sporting director and a head coach versus a manager model. You might look at maybe David Moyes when he was at Everton was the main man by far, and he was in charge, and he had full control over every aspect of that club. And then maybe when Roberto came in, he was more of a head coach and was happy to delegate some of the other stuff to other people, which is in some ways is good, and in some ways, because as a club, if you're looking at it, you don't want to give full control to someone to take over and run your whole club. But on the other hand, it makes it hard when you have a personality of a coach who then blames. So maybe when a more recent Everton manager would have had problems with the medical department, for example, and you see these fallouts, and it just then creates a terrible atmosphere within the club, because people are pointing fingers and it's not collaborative. So I think that's where people like Graham Potter have developed really good reputations, because they've gone in, they've said, I'm the coach, I will work with the director of football, we'll be collaborative, we'll work together to get this club as good as it can be. I don't want full control over recruitment, but I want my say on the players we recruit. I don't want full control over medical, but I'll be part of almost like a managing board of the club that comes together regularly, and And yeah, someone like Dan Ashworth, who was the Brighton, is now at Newcastle, is very good at kind of managing people. So we've also done work recruiting sporting directors for clubs as well. So it's always like finding those people in the industry who work in the way that clubs want to work nowadays, which is far more collaborative. And they're huge. I mean, a Premier League football club can have hundreds of people working for it, and real specialists in those departments. And the idea that one guy, a manager, is also a medical expert is ridiculous when you've got fully qualified doctors, several like fully qualified physios working in the medical department. I don't think a manager who walks in and says, no, he's fit, I've seen him running, should be able to overrule the medical department and advice. And likewise, I don't think they should be able to go into recruitment and say, I really like this player, he was brilliant against us. And that kind of trumps the work done by 20 people in the department who've watched every single player and spent months grading them and ranking them appropriately. So you need personalities who fit in with the way the club works. And some do still want an autocratic manager who's the main man and in charge. And I certainly think if you look at Liverpool, Klopp is definitely the front man. Michael Edwards was a sporting director. Did you ever see or hear anything of him in the press? Never. No. He's so kind of behind the scenes, but obviously what he does behind the scenes is brilliant. But he's happy for Klopp to have the limelight and be the face of the club. And so you just need people who blend together. And if Klopp was maybe less of a personality, you'd need your sporting director to be more of the leader at the club. But you just got to find the right balance. So yeah, we spent a lot of time looking just beyond the basic performance stats and into the personalities.
Fantastic. Andy, just very quickly, tell me why a manager shouldn't have... Tim's just touched on it, but in your opinion, why a manager? Because if I'm a head coach and you're recommending players and I don't think that I'm going to use them, you do get a situation. We've just seen it. We've seen it at Bournemouth, say, early on. Scott Parker was like, well, yeah, we brought people in, but we've got to spend more money if you want to survive in the Premier League or whatever. So why shouldn't a manager have full control? And sorry, just two parts to it. And if they don't, can they really be blamed if the team doesn't do well?
Well, that's about, again, that comes, the second part of the answer first, that comes back to collaborative process. And I think for people like myself, it's about buy-in. And often managers have to trust people. Again, Tim talked about relationships. That relationship between the recruitment department, the decision makers in the recruitment department and the coaching staff has to be good, because they have to have that trust that you understand their way of thinking, how they want to play and what type of personalities they want to bring in. So it's about getting buy-in. Don't be wrong, sometimes buy-in is quite easy because certain managers are really open. Sometimes you need successful transfers to get buy-in. So, you need a player to come in and do really well, and they go, actually, data really does work for me, and these guys know what they're doing. And so sometimes it takes time. In terms of managers having total control, the reason I don't believe it works like that is because managers, much like players, leave. And if you build a team, now don't get me wrong, I understand why Liverpool, I understand why Manchester City have built their clubs in their managers' image. They both earned it, really. Klopp, probably took a little bit more time at Liverpool, about 18 months, 2 seasons to get going. Manchester City, if you think about it, started building for Pep in 2012 when they changed the academy, when Tzitziki Bergerstein came in. They changed all how they worked in the academy, and eventually you produce players like Phil Foden who are ready to play in Pep's system, and Cole Palmer and people like that. But no, I think that's the main crux of it, really, is that, a club should not be beholden to a manager. They should be able to continue the work they're doing post the manager. And I think that's where some clubs have made the mistakes. We obviously know one that's done that, where it's been heavily set around the manager's decision-making and keeping that manager happy, rather than the club having their own identity and finding managers who fit in with that. Much like players do, but then once they move on, sacked, resigned, whatever it may be, you can bring someone else in. It may tweak things slightly. Of course, not every manager is the same. It's hard to find managers who are exactly the same. But finding someone who can continue that work and use the players that they have. Obviously, when Pep first came to Man City, they didn't have fullbacks. We spent, £200 million on fullbacks. Yeah. Not every team's got that luxury. So identifying a manager who fits with the team and the players you've got. And obviously, you're going to recruit, but you're not going to be able to recruit a whole new team, a whole new style. So it's about that fit. But no, for me, the reasons managers shouldn't have full control is because of that. I think also managers don't have the time anymore. I think there's a lot more that goes into being a manager now than maybe under David Moyes' era. There's probably, obviously there's so much more information on hand that, managers often, look at players they've seen play against them.
Yeah.
Managers haven't got time to go and look at video day in and day out, and go to watch players in Europe. I know some more used to it at times, but it's very hard to be able to do all of that and find the right players. So it's been, as I say, having that relationship with the recruitment department that allows them to find players they want. Don't be wrong, managers should still have a major input in recruitment. Of course they should, because it's their team. As someone once said, you never sign a player that only a manager wants, but you never sign a player the manager doesn't want. So that's the philosophy really. But as long as everyone's happy with signing a player, then sign that player. But it has to be within the confinements of the club structure and where they're heading. I think in the past, clubs have tended to sign players who are managers' players, and then when they've left, you end up sending them to Turkey, as people have said, or you're stuck with them for that 5-year contract. So it's about making the right decisions overall for a club and what's in the club's best interest, not just individuals' best interests.
Excellent. Well, we'll see the big test now. We'll see at Brighton, won't we? Where obviously Roberto De Zerbi's come in, and it's going to be interesting to see whether he can do well. Have they planned properly? They took the time over it. So, and you imagine Brighton will have done their homework, and he had Sassuolo playing some excellent stuff, so it'll be interesting to see what he does. Finally then, I'll come to you first, Tim. What do you think the future of data in football is, and have you seen a change in the small time, but a few years in football already? Have you seen a change? So have you seen changes in football since you've been involved? And where do you think the future is for data within it?
Yeah, there's definitely been a change. I'd say pretty much every club now has access to data platforms. There's Wisecout, there's StatsBomb, there's Opta. There's the process data that the likes of us provide, which has got another kind of bit of processing done to it to make it more relevant to them. So everyone has access to it. I think there's definitely things like tracking data and things coming into football, which is far more than just like counting how many shots a player's had, which was the first step. Second step was where they took those shots from on a kind of coordinates, and then working out. And that's been really good for finding players. Like talent identification, would call it, is really been stepped up a lot by that. And I'd say you could look at most players now anywhere in the world, and you could get good data for them. It's then how you use that and how you interpret it. I think that's the next level, and that's where I think the gap in the market still is. It's the interpretation and the making sure that all your processes and things line up, so you know what a good player looks like in data for your system. So not just this one's got all the green bars are all green, and this one's looks worse. Like, I mean, a really good example of the context is Alex Iwobi this season. So we would look and say he's gone up a level. If you look at his basic data profiles on some systems, he looks worse. It looks like he's not anywhere near as good as he was last season. And so Andy and I were looking at the other day thinking this is odd, because to our eyes, he's obviously gone up levels. The thing is, his role has changed. He's playing deeper. So he's not picking up the ball as high up the pitch in his threatening areas. He's putting in, he was in a team last year that couldn't retain the ball. So he was having to have lots of opportunities to turn the ball over, more so than this season, even though his success rate of turning over the ball this season is higher. Last season, he was just involved in more changes of possession. So that inflated the data. It was more of a, last season as well, it was more of a team that he was picking up the ball and driving at players, and this time he's probably passing into the forward players. So again, his kind of breaks from the central areas look worse. So you've got to take the data, yes, and use it, but you've got to apply the context of it, and you do that by advanced data. So we've got things that pick that up that probably aren't available to the general public, but you've also then got the watching of the player, and that it was always going to be involved in the process to do it. But so I'd say the availability of data is higher than ever, but I still think there's very few clubs who I would say have a full kind of data informed processes within their club. So they might have access to all the information, and they might do great stuff in the background with it. But when it comes to which player should we sign and what should we do in training this week, and how do we decide whether we're doing well or not, I think that type of thing is still missing at quite a few clubs that you would expect to have that type of thinking involved. And that always comes down to ownership, and it comes down to just making sure the long-term interests of the club are always the main thought of everyone involved, and not just career advancement in the next year or two. Because as Andy says, managers go, sporting directors go, owners go. The only people who are with clubs for life are the fans. So if anyone should be thinking long term about their football clubs and demanding that things are put in place, and not worrying about, it's all about next season, it should be us. We should be the ones thinking, for better or worse, I'll still be supporting this club in 20 years' time, hopefully. I want us to be winning stuff over those 20 years, not just next season. Yeah. So if anyone's pushing for long-term strategic thinking, it should be the fans. Whilst often it's probably the perception that we're the short-termists and we're the ones who want everything now. But I think we need to reset our thinking and be persuading our clubs that we don't worry so much as long as we stay up. Yeah, by all means, take 3 or 4 years to build what you're going to build, because we're still going to be here and we want it to be as good as possible.
And Andy, I'll leave the last word to you then. Same for you, and only, what do you think the future of data in football is, and what next for Market Insights? You can have the final say. Go on.
Okay, I'll quickly go to the future data. I think models become more advanced. I think there'll be a lot more granular detail. I think a lot of people working on using both event data with physical data. I think the amalgamation of those is where it's headed. Yeah. I think basketball did a lot of this, where they threw massive amounts of information at models, but they realised they probably threw too information. So I think there's going to be, we'll have another level, I think, of going up in terms of the use of data. But I also think there'll be a step back situation as well coming in a couple of years, where we will, like Tim said, the interpretation, how we use it may change slightly as well. Yeah. So I think that's going. I think also the people at clubs who are making these decisions and the people who drive the data will change. If you look at baseball now, I think 29 of the 32 are non-ex players. I think that will evolve in football. I think you'll get more. Michael Edwards, who obviously came, I know he did play for a certain period, but he came through with Prozone, for example, which was an early analytics company and performance company. So I think that will change. The people making the decisions within football will change. In terms of Market Insights, well, we've got a lot going on, really, in terms of working with investment groups. We've got projects we're looking to do in Africa. I think that's another future of data will be, I think, people will want more data from Africa at the moment. Africa's a bit of a black hole in terms of there's not a lot of data for the leagues. I think clubs will want to invest in that, and I think a company that does do that will certainly make money, because I think that's where a lot of the next big players are coming from. Is that these Senegals, your Ivory Coast, your Cameroons, your Nigerias, and your Malis, as obviously Salzburg have seen. So I think that I think for us, we're looking to expand. We're obviously still looking to work with clubs in terms of recruitment, but we're also looking to work with investors and do strategic planning for clubs and help them build as well. We're also looking to do other projects like our African projects.
Outstanding. Well, I think to be honest, we could probably have another hour doing this, and maybe we
come back another time.
Oh God, absolutely, because it is fascinating. I love all of this stuff. But for now, a huge thank you to you, Andy, and to you, Tim, for joining me. That was really, really interesting. I loved it. And like I said, I could have gone on for another hour. But thanks very much, gents, for joining me.
No worries.
There you go. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Really interesting, an insight there into Market Insights, and an insight to how data is being used in football and the progression of it. So check out Market Insights. Keep looking on Twitter to these two very knowledgeable gentlemen giving you lots of stuff around data. So check it all out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you later.